Well, joining us now in studio for more is Dr. Dahlia Scheindlin, pollster and political strategist, and Jeremy Saltan, advisor to the Yamina Hadash party and political strategist. And Jeremy, I want to start with you because Yamina Hadash, the party of current Defense Minister Naftali Bennett, in the news this evening. Of course, they are not formally in this new unity government yet. Naftali Bennett has said he wants at least 2 or 3 major portfolios for his party, the Health Ministry, Education Ministry, or Transport Ministry. Sources close to Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly saying that's not going to happen. So I have to ask you, Jeremy, is Naftali Bennett, the Yamina Hadash, going to be part of this government?
There are 2 questions. And these are 2 questions that Naftali Bennett asked, once again, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in their conversation that they had today. The first question is, what direction is this government headed in? We know what the coalition agreements say. We don't know what the coalition guidelines say. We need to know what the direction is of this government. The second question is, what influence are we going to have? Now, I'm not going to talk about what ministries we might have asked for, what we have not asked for. That's not what the issue is here. The issue is, are we going to be senior members in this coalition, or are we going to be asked to be junior members of this coalition? Once we have the answer to those 2 questions in terms of influence and direction, we'll know whether we're in the coalition or the opposition.
Now, Dahlia, it's known that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not too personally fond of Naftali Bennett, but there could be other issues here. Maybe it's convenient for Prime Minister Netanyahu not to have this more right-wing party in the coalition. For example, we talk about the Trump peace plan, that annexation of settlements with the Yamina Hadash party would like, but not, for example, some of the limitations on building there or proceeding with some kind of talks with the Palestinians.
Well, I think Netanyahu, for the most part, is primarily concerned with the chess game of the Israeli domestic political scene. And anything he does with relation to annexation is going to be a matter of moving pieces to satisfy the right, to somehow placate the center, and to basically show the voters that he's hardline and advancing annexation, but not too much to earn too much international, pushback. And so I think either way, I really think what we're going to see is that he does something incremental when it comes to annexation. It's going to be something scaled back, not as bombastic as annexing the entire Jordan Valley or all the settlements. Probably it will be scaled down to 1 settlement at a time, some housing tenders, building in areas of E1. And that way he'll be able to tell the right that he's done something, be able to kind of massage it with the center, continue his relationship with Trump. By the way, I wouldn't call it a peace plan. I would call it the Trump plan, because I don't think it will bring peace. And I think that he is much more concerned with maintaining his position in society, staving off his legal troubles, staying in power, and managing that chessboard.
Well, what about that, Jeremy? Maybe that is a kind of formula that Dahlia put out there, and maybe the Yamina party, Naftali Bennett, might be an awkward fit in a government making those kind of measures.
First of all, we're going to obviously support any attempt to apply Israeli sovereignty, whether we're in the coalition or the opposition. Right. But exactly,
annexation.
That's fine. We can say potato on this. I don't think you can annex something that's your own if it's your own.
Fine.
But the point is what we're afraid of is exactly what Dahlia is talking about here, which is missing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in doing something incremental. I don't think the right-wing bloc voters will go ahead and forgive Benjamin Netanyahu if this is the legacy that he's going to leave himself, that he chooses to go ahead and leave. And again, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity on the table.
Right. But I think that he won't earn there. They won't be mad at him in the end, the right wing, because ultimately Israel has been annexing in small and incremental ways without passing laws to do it for the last decade, certainly even for the last 50 years, you could say. But Netanyahu has accelerated the process under the radar, and it will probably continue one way or the other. And I think that his supporters within the settler community know that.
I think that his supporters disagree with that position, and if they felt that way, they would not be pushing to see movement on this issue. Obviously, they want to see movement on this issue because they don't feel that Netanyahu is doing enough.
No, because they want more.
Well, everybody wants to make sure that they get their interests heard, and that is obviously something that
I'm glad we got this point out. It's a fascinating debate, but it could continue on for the next hour. Dahlia, you're a pollster. I want to talk to you about just this government. Now we know that it's coming into being how popular, how much support it has going in from the Israeli public.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen various things in the polls. I think one of the most convincing polls that I saw was actually not from the last 24 hours, but from about a week ago when people knew this was roughly the government and the agreement was published, showing that about 63%, it was one of the media polls, I may be getting it wrong, 63% support it. Makes a lot of sense to me because about half the voters in Israel are right-wing, 50%, and about half of the blue and white supporters is about 13%. They won 26% in the polls. And so to me, this frames the Israeli public perfectly. Blue and white voters split over this issue, and about half of them are supportive of the government. All of the right is supportive. I mean, it's an assumption of analyzing that poll, but I think that's the starting point. People are exhausted, sick of elections. There's deep discontent from everybody on the other side of the map who's not included in that, the 47%. And then I think there's the other major question in public opinion, which is what is the current level of legitimacy and trust for the judiciary, which has been so deeply assaulted by the right wing, who is constantly calling the court, some sort of dictatorship. And I think we saw a peak of this kind of harassment. Some people have called it incitement, including former head of Shabak, Carmen Gilon. And we saw a decline in trust for the Supreme Court as a result in a survey from just yesterday in Israel Hayom, 46%. Usually that number is over 50%. I think that's another thing we have to consider going into this government.
I want to go to Jeremy on that because it's been a major issue for your party, for Yamina Hadash, the judiciary. You want to see major changes there, but this new coalition agreement with Benny Gantz sort of does not take into account some of the issues your party wanted.
It does not take it into account at all.
Okay.
Avi Nissenkorn is going to be the next justice minister. I think Tzipi Livni was more to the right's liking than Nissenkorn, the former trade union head, who's definitely the left-wing marker within blue and white and probably this upcoming coalition. So that's a very big issue for us. I expect that if this is a situation where we do not end up in the coalition, that is going to be something we will remind all members of the right-wing bloc moving forward.
Sounds like you're gearing up to be a great opposition.
Listen, as I said, we have two questions. We'll see, what happens. I would love to be a part of this coalition. I know that everybody within my party feels that way. We've been part of the right-wing bloc since the beginning. Election after election after election this year, we've had the prime minister's back. If he wants to break up the bloc, that's on him.
I have to be just briefly, and I want to also let
Yes.
Can your party really afford to sit perhaps 4 years in opposition to a government like this?
I will be very surprised if this government lasts 4 years. If it lasts a year and a half, I think a lot of people will be surprised as well.
I want you to use your imagination, Dahlia, greatly, and imagine you are a political advisor, as you've been to other parties, to the Yamina party. Would you advise them to sit out of government, at this kind of government, what the impact it could have on their voters?
I like this role-playing because I've never advised a party like Yamina.
Advise Jeremy.
But I will advise you, don't go into the opposition because according to the government agreement that we have all seen, the opposition has been stripped of its powers in Israel. The opposition no longer has a spot on the Judicial Appointment Committee. The opposition has been taken off of major Knesset committees that it traditionally held. We practically don't have an opposition in Israel.
There's something called values. And I know that there's something in real politics is crazy and everyone wants to look only at the ministries and the portfolios, and that's what the top headlines are. But we care about our values. Our voter base care about values. And even if that means that we're not going to have a lot of influence, I'll tell you like this. If we're going to be a junior member of this coalition in which we are just added decoration and we will have no influence, and the direction is going to be, again, with Nissenkorn as the justice minister, Gantz as the defense minister, taking us down a lane where there will not be an application of Israeli sovereignty throughout Judea and Samaria, at least in the 30% the Trump plan is talking about. Then again, we have to ask ourselves, and we have to look at ourselves in the mirror. Now, it might be easy for Benny Gantz. It's a little bit more difficult when you have real values.
But what do you think about the fact that there's no real power for the opposition anymore in Israel? It's been stripped of all its traditional roles.
That bothers me. I feel very good that we did not vote in Knesset for any of these changes. I think there are a lot of problems with the basic law that was passed this morning. I think there are a lot of issues that we've been witness to over the last week or so. But, what it comes down to is we need to see how the next few days play out. Look, I'm not convinced that Wednesday is going to be the day that we swear in the next government. If, okay, Netanyahu promised Gantz.
We should know. I want to explain because, indeed, Benjamin Netanyahu actually has 14 days, I believe.
Yes, 14 days. And then I want to tell you that the Speaker can extend the vote for an extra 7 days. At the end of those 14 days, you don't need to conduct a vote. You just need to tell the President that you have it.
I want to go back, Dahlia. You talked about the public support for this government. I want to put you on the spot, and Jeremy. When are the next elections in Israel going to be held?
I think there's too many factors in play to really predict which, whether it's going to be a year and a half, 3 years, or 4 years, or less. I'm trying to, I think that the main thing to do would be to try to consider the scenarios that could trigger elections. And
Give me one quickly.
If there's any sort of Supreme Court ruling that the government doesn't like, they already have precedents and protections in the agreement to trigger new elections. In the case of if the court were to rule against Netanyahu, of course, they can't just project that onto anything. But it's hard to see.
I think it's the state budget. The state budget, if you read the coalition deal, the entire 14-page document, or at least the original one before they made all those changes after the Supreme Court case, you will see that the biggest weak spot for Benny Gantz is the situation around every vote that has to do with what becomes a rolling biannual budget. If you ask me, the government's going to fall based on that, and according to that clause, and only that clause, when the government, no, I don't think it'll be this year. I think it'll be the following state budget. But when it falls on that clause, Netanyahu remains prime minister, and it does not go over to Benny Gantz.
Right,
that's an important.
And remember the backdrop: Israel is going into perhaps a economic recession as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. That is an X factor here. Jeremy Saltan, Dahlia Scheindlin, Dr. Dahlia Scheindlin, I should say. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News.